session. And we appreciate you staying for this, and then we'll get you out. We've got, you're back to Australia today?
Today, yeah.
Today, okay.
Yeah.
What's that trip like?
18, well, I fly to Dallas and then 18 hours out to Melbourne.
Dallas and then just 18 hours?
Yeah. But, you know, I actually like the longer flights as long as they land in your destination. If you do a longer flight and you have to go somewhere after that,
right,
that's terrible.
Now, as an introvert, you get that flight, you probably get a little bit of you get to just relax, right?
Yeah, it's funny. So I create a whole bunch of rules to keep my anxiety at bay, and I feel like when you know, like, because I'm doing speaking to at the moment I land, and so for me, I find that if you do the day-to-day emails when you're on the plane, it doesn't do anything for me. But you know how a lot of people have got anxiety around, I'm going to catch up on all those emails? So what I do is I switch my Wi-Fi off, and I just catch up on emails, and I get in my zone, and I just catch up on all my backlog. And so you've got anxiety about being on the flight, but you also have a reduction of anxiety because you're catching up on your workflow. And the two combat really well. There's 1,000 rules I have just like that allow me to function at my best.
That's neat.
Yeah.
Well, for this session, you're welcome to, we're going to do some Q&A. I wanted to kick this off because everyone who's staying for this session, business owners, entrepreneurs, founders, this is all about what Washington Avenue Advisors, what we really focus on, what we're investing in our community. And along with Mike Maddox from Freedom Builders is going to be joining us soon. But we're talking about how do you know and track the value of your company. For most business owners, we know that the value of your company is probably your single greatest asset financially in your life. And you're relying on that value for the lifestyle you've been planning. So we want to make sure that we're really focusing on how do you know and how do you track value, and then how do you know how to grow the value of your company. So many business owners talk about like top line revenue and profit, people, team. What about the valuation? Why aren't you tracking that like you track your 401k, like you track your stocks? So we'll be talking about the 8 drivers of growing valuation. Mike will be up here talking about the 6 keys of operational efficiency. Those are the things that can make your business more enjoyable for you as an owner. So that you either want to run it longer or you're going to make it enjoyable for that next person and optimize the value. And while we've got you, I just wanted to start with that. Like, you work with so many business owners. So what are some of the wins? What are some of the mistakes you see business owners making as they think about growing value and eventually transitioning that to someone?
Yeah, so I think, especially when a lot of people start their businesses, they're just like any customer's a good customer. Like, I just need somebody to hire me. And I mean, when you've got less economies of scale, less proof of concept, like, that's the worst place to start, because, I mean, how else do you compete except on price? So what I tend to find is a lot of owners have these amazing skill sets, often that they don't talk about. I mean, by the way, if you all have businesses, there is no way your customers pay you every week if you don't provide something exceptional they can't get elsewhere. And if they ever refer you, there is no way they would do that going, oh, you've got to try them, they're exactly the same as everybody else. Right? It just doesn't happen that way. So, what I find is a lot of these really great businesses, they struggle to articulate their value in a way that separates them from everyone else. And because of that, and it is really about being safe, because they're trying to sell to a broader demographic, but also they really don't understand the true value they provide. And a lot of people, they don't answer, they don't actually know what it is that they do that's tremendously different. As a matter of fact, because you guys, I can say this now, right, that they're going to get a copy of the book.
Yep.
VIPs? Okay. I couldn't say that for all the people that believe me, but for you guys, you're going to get a copy of the book. If you don't actually know what it is that you do that makes you unique, and I will say there's a lot of humble people that it's not that they're trying to stay general, it's just that they think they're the same as everyone else. And there's a script, an exact word-for-word script. You're allowed to blame me, my book tells you you're allowed to. Say, I'm working with this new coach, and he told me to think about my best customers, and you are one of them, so first, thank you. And then secondly, he asked me to ask you what it was about what we do that allows you, gets you to keep coming back and recommending us. And I promise you they'll say these 2 answers. You provide exceptional customer service, and you're really knowledgeable, which is not useful at all, right? Because who do you know that's trying to start? Reuben, you've got to hire me, man. I provide terrible customer service, and I really don't know much, right? Everyone's going to say they have those things. So what you need to say is, thank you so much for saying that. What specifically about our knowledgeability do you appreciate? And then all of a sudden you get this treasure trove of information. And that is really where you can build your message. So to come back to your question, the first thing that I see that makes people, when they start, the ones that survive that period of failing to articulate their value and not niching down at the beginning, grow to a place where they start to attribute their success to that, and they stay in that place. It's kind of that's why so many businesses die in that no man's land when they try and hire people, because now you've removed the founder's passion and you've got someone trying to do the service and sell, and then that usually falls apart. And so what I find is if you don't have the strategy right, you're stuck on tactics, and tactics don't work so well. And so learning how to articulate your value, what's uniquely different, and your unique passion is absolutely the number one mistake I see people make. The second is that usually the founder is the best salesperson in their business. And if you're the salesperson in your business and you haven't figured out how to, and don't get me wrong, if you've got a sales team that sells your product and you don't understand it, they could leave at any point. So I'd still be terrified to buy your business if I don't know that there's a documented process. If you've just got unicorns, I'm going to buy your business. I'm going to pay a lot of money for it. They're going to ask for pay rises. I won't be able to afford it. They're all going to go somewhere else. So you need to have a system that you've created, that you've then given to other people who attribute their success in sales to the sales system, not their natural ability.
So Brian will come up here in a little bit talking about hub and spoke and that model, but we'll be talking about the 8 drivers that grow valuation. That is clearly one of them that's going to be important, is having those systems and making sure it's not just about the founder or the CEO, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Any questions for Matthew that you wanted to ask from the previous session, or business owners here thinking about positioning your business for sale? Which, by the way, 5 years ago, I remember it was hard for people to come to these like exit planning things because everybody was afraid to be in a room with people and know that they were thinking about selling their business. I'm glad to see people are open about that, and today, just knowing how valuable your business is, this isn't about selling a business. This is about knowing how to position your business so that it could be sellable. For you, that might just be that you want to keep it longer and run it that way too.
You sold multiple multi-million-dollar businesses, or created multiple multi-million-dollar businesses before you're 30. You can probably repeat that formula, probably get bigger, better ones. When you think about your legacy and what are you going to do over the next, 50 years or so?
Well, it's a really good question. So you're the guy that said that you would do the 16-hour days, right?
That I would do that now?
Yeah.
I used to do that. That sounds fun.
Okay.
I don't know if I would trade what I'm doing now for that. But.
Yeah, so I want my legacy to be that most people don't have to do that. What's really interesting is I've learned you can create rapid growth out of anything. There's nothing worse than a rapid growth business with customers who don't like your business you can't stand. And so for me, look, don't get me wrong, I've helped a lot of people create rapid growth businesses, but the fundamental thing is that for me, the pain's got to be worth the gain. So I feel like a lot of people say, I need to create a business, this is the practical one, and they go and do that. So for me, actually I can tell you this. So in 2007, I won in Melbourne, Australia, I won what was called the Young Achiever of the Year Award. And I remember I would have been 20, 21, and I remember going home and I was miserable and I didn't understand why. And I had to take some time to reflect on it. And what I realized was that I'd always felt like the slow kid. And that first business was in telecommunications. And gosh, if somebody mentions a call rate to me again, I'm going to climb the walls. But that business made a fortune. But yet I was buying things to kind of plug my soul because I didn't feel like I was contributing. And I really didn't feel like it was making an impact. And what I learned is that I'd spent all of my time focused on goals to prove everyone else wrong. That I wasn't, worthless, I guess you could say. And so I tried to figure out ways that I could be more connected to what I would consider meaningful, and that's different for everyone. And what I would say, what's really interesting is whenever I work with someone, the first thing I do is I get them to write 3 business goals, 3 personal goals, one selfish to themselves, because sure, that'll drive them. But then I get them to summarize why each goal is important to them in 250 words or less, each goal separately. And by the way, there's an exercise, I actually talk about this exercise. I've got a podcast called The Introvert's Edge, which is my main focus, but I've got another podcast called The Better Business Coach, and episode 17 runs through this exact exercise. And what I find is high achievers are really good at writing their goals. Truthfully, most of them have never achieved one, right? They've got to build self-efficacy towards goal attainment. So I actually suggest creating lower level goals, knocking those out of the park, and then as your belief grows, so should your goals. But what I find is when they're forced to write down why it's important, they quickly realize they've inherited their goal from their mother, their father, their drunk roommate, they had in college. They just hear these things and then run after them. And by being confronted with that, they realize that what they've been charging towards is not what's important at all. So if I was to think about my legacy, I love doing what I do right now, right? And I think in every other business, while I've, yes, made great money, don't want to buy a business that doesn't make great money. Yes, I make great money now as well. I'm connected to doing like what I love. Like I remember I did a video shoot once it was like the day after Thanksgiving, and that was my first year in the US with my wife, and I didn't know how much you guys party on Thanksgiving. So I had 2 TV interviews, like one at 6 a.m. and one at like 6:45 or something, and then I did a whole day shoot. Everyone else was exhausted. I barely slept, and 8 hours in, I'm still loving what I do, and I have an eye condition that struggles with white light, so it wipes me. And that was the reading issue that I had. So I need to wear lenses, and no one wants to watch a video with a guy wearing contact lenses. So like that whole day I should have been wiped, but I was supercharged. Now sure, when I went home, I hit the pillow and went straight to sleep. But I find that if I was to think about my legacy, I want every introvert to realize they're not second-class citizens. Sure, that is my primary purpose. But I just think there's something heroic about a person with enough talent, skill, and belief in themselves to start a business of their own. And I feel that heroism shouldn't be wasted on something that's not truly important to the person that's creating it. And usually that heroism is usually connected to the impact they want to make. Like the story we had earlier, right? It was all about him as opposed to the impact that he wanted to make, which is really what it was about. And you could see that business was meaningful to him. And so for me, yes, I want to help a whole bunch of introverts attain rapid growth. And some extroverts too, it's okay, I'm happy to help. But the truth is that I really care most about the fact that they don't create the wrong business. Because I feel that people jump into the practical choice, and then 3-4 years later, even if they make money, they're sad. But if usually when they start to not make money, they're like, this was supposed to be the practical choice. What have I done with myself? And anybody that's going to buy a business, and I think we should talk about this because I think that one of the biggest issues is like, okay, if I'm going to do what I'm passionate about and I build a personal brand to sell it, how do I then sell it? And there's kind of that interplay around, okay, I need to make the business not about me, but then I want the business to be about me. And I think that's where the conflict comes. So people say, oh, I want this business that's kind of, this practical business that I'm not going to feel sad about selling that's not connected to me. It's the wrong choice, right? I see branding as a seesaw, right? So I'll give you an example. I created a festival in Austin originally. It was called Small Business Festival. It grew to, it actually was listed by Inc. as the #3 conference in America for small business. And I mean, the first year we had 60 days to launch it. We had over 5,000 people attend and we had 100 speakers. And the first year it was the Matthew Pollard show, right? Everyone wanted to interview me about it. I had to be on stage. The next year we grew it into multiple cities and we leveraged the success of Austin. The third year, like I replaced myself in Austin. The fourth year, no one even knew who it was. It's great. As a person that wants to sell a business, that's exactly what you want. But sometimes it does need to be about you. But when you start, it should be absolutely about your passion. Not your passion for making yourself happy, but your passion for the change you want to see in the world. Because as soon as you learn how to articulate that from a place that's not about you, that's something that somebody will buy.
That conference is now called South by Southwest, isn't it?
Well, actually, funny enough, it's not. But South by Southwest, I was actually one of my proudest moments. The mayor of Austin, during Small Business Week, did a proclamation, and he said there are 4 things that we're most proud about in our city: South by Southwest, Formula One, ACL, and Small Business Festival.
That's great. Well, Jordan, who told his story earlier with High Caliber, I remember when he came up, because I've seen you do this on stage in Detroit at an event with a woman, and you told the story back to them, and everybody was like, how did he retain all that? And he told the story even better than they did. With Jordan, I was thinking, that's going to be a tough one, because he's actually a pretty good storyteller. But when I asked him before he left, I said, so what did you take away from Matthew telling you your story back? And he said, I realized he's right. He said, I shy away from the part about the emotion that I want to create. And it validated for him that I need to lean into the emotion, because he truly does want to create and manufacture joy for people. That's what he's told me before, but he didn't say that much when he was up.
You know what's really interesting? And it's funny, I see this in introverts a lot, especially. Like introverts don't want to make anything about themselves, but when they're selling, they make it all about themselves. And I was actually talking to Don Miller. Is anyone familiar with the Story brand?
Yes.
Okay, so Don Miller, I had him on we have I do a summit called the Introverted Seller Summit, and we invited him on to talk, because Don Miller's great at story branding, like from a marketing perspective. And we always laugh, like, because people are like, oh, isn't it the same thing? And it's totally different, right? The conversation you have with a real person telling stories and the conversation you have with the mass market, it needs to be a different type of story. But we were talking about from both stages why it is that an introvert makes stories about themselves specifically. And a lot of extroverts do as well. It's really interesting how shy and introverted and extrovert behaves when they're selling themselves in their own professional service. Because there's that imposter syndrome that starts to set in. And what was really interesting when we discussed it is it's because we're looking for acceptance. And that's why it's so important to not tell a story on the fly. You've got to take a step back, you've got to plan, you've got to prepare it. Because a story should be all about the moral that you're trying to deliver to better somebody's life. And when we tell a story, a lot of times we tell it, and of course we're in the story, so it's all about us. And then we also are hoping somebody buys, and we have a little bit of imposter syndrome. So the story becomes this I journey that nobody cares about. And that's not what anybody wants to have taken from their story, but that's just what happens. And that's why I always say, like, record the story, think about how you can really frame it differently. And yeah, emotions, I mean, let's face it, men struggle to talk about emotions especially. And that's what he said, he used to talk about emotions, and he's not an emotional guy, so he didn't. And I'm like, you know what's funny, when you tell a story with emotional triggers to a man that is not used to take on emotions, and they feel something, like, oh, I felt something, I want to buy that. So it's actually really powerful, but if you just type in the words, feeling words into Google, these feeling wheels come up. And you can just say, okay, based on this person's story, and actually there's a part in the red book that I have, if you go into the back and just type in WAA into the receipt number, because you won't be able to access it without a receipt, and my team will give it to you. But it asks you to write what's called a mantra. And it's where you write down where your niche is. It talks about what unique skills you have, and then it tells you to empathize with your client and think through a day in their life. And think about the stresses, what bounces them out of bed in the morning, who they're fighting with during the day, what anxiety they have. And I find if you have that feelings wheel up as you do that, you start to come up with all these feelings that not normally have occurred to you. And then when you write your story, you look at that part of the mantra and you look at the feeling wheel, and then all of a sudden it becomes, it's really not that difficult. I don't want it to sound like rocket science. I don't want people to think that I've got like the Da Vinci Code and I can do this and no one else can't. I mean, that whole transformation, you were saying he's a good storyteller, right? That transformation happens every time in 5 to 8 minutes, right? Imagine if you just sat down with it for 60 minutes, right? Okay, maybe you're not as good as me. 60 minutes is fine. Now, what my suggestion would be is if you want to try this, find someone in this room before you leave and ask them if you can tell them your story with the framework and have the other person listen and just write down what you did well and what you were missing. I think the best way to learn is to teach. And my bet is, firstly, they'll come up with a better moral than you because you're in the story. And then secondly, they'll tell you about emotions, and they'll tell you, and hopefully they'll mention this and hopefully you'll remember, when you tell a story, a lot of times people forget to use the name of the person. They'll say the CTO or this company. Companies don't have emotions, and neither do CTOs. People. If you use the word David or John or Sarah, all of a sudden you're like, oh, Sarah, I can imagine she would be this age with kids or whatever, and now I can feel like, people getting forced to go back into work on the weekend and upset kids and things like that, and that makes a massive difference.
Thank you. Any other questions for Matthew while we have him here? Yes, Julie.
Sorry, it's a lame question. You mentioned a podcast episode.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
What's the name of that podcast?
Sure, it's called Better Business Coach, is the podcast, and it's episode number 17. It's called Forget About Goals, Why is the Key to Success? And it really loops into networking. I'll give you an example. I know Nick asked me to talk about kind of branding and having something that gets beyond the commodity space, and passion and mission is everything to that. Like, I hate has anyone heard of the elevator pitch, by the way? That superficial transactional thing that nobody likes? Yeah, okay. So, I do this with this group of people, even if, right? So when I came to the US, so I moved here when I turned 30, and I pretty much left. I mean, I had a really good network in Australia. I achieved a ton there, but it was an awkward fostering of network, right? People begrudgingly said hi to me because I was at events, and I didn't know how to really, I was great at sales, but that doesn't work in like social relationships. So then I moved into, my wife was from Boca Raton, Florida, and we both moved into Austin. We didn't know anybody. And so I had to come here and really figure out networking. I remember the first time somebody asked me about what it was I do. And I didn't know how to express it well, so I said I was a sales trainer, and they looked at me like I was one step above a scam artist, and the next thing I knew I was defending what I did. I wasn't even trying to sell them something, I was just trying to make a friend. So I remember going out there, I'm never doing that again. You know what, I'll say I'm in marketing. And so I said I was in marketing, and the first thing that somebody said is, oh, I did marketing, how much do you cost? Whoa, we just met, chill. And then the next thing I was like, somebody then said to me, oh, we've got someone in marketing, and then I'm like, oh, I've got magic ruby slippers, I'm different, I didn't want to do that. So I went looking for strategy for how to do it, and then I found the elevator pitch, which is so, do you want to buy from me? No, what about you? I'm not doing that. which is why everyone does that aimless stuff. Well, oh, my day job's this. Like, I don't want to oversell it. And no one wants to talk to someone like that.
It's interesting you bring that up with Julie because she knows a thing or two about marketing as well.
Do you?
Julie, M Connections, they're actually our marketing partner for Washington Avenue Advisors.
Really? Well, that's perfect timing. So,
And she and her team have been the ones promoting you coming today. So that's
well, perfect. Well, thank you for doing a great job. Looks like the attendance is pretty good. What I would suggest is when you're talking about marketing, everybody talks about the strategic strategy of marketing. Like when I went back and did my MBA, and a lot of people don't know this, you can go back and do an MBA without doing an undergrad. It's amazing. But when I went back, a lot of the stuff that works in corporate marketing doesn't work in small business marketing. And truthfully, it's far more about the passion and mission articulation. So I'll give you an example. Like when I go to a networking event, when somebody asks me what I do, I've learned not to say I'm a sales trainer, I'm not a marketer. I say I'm a rapid growth guy. People's brains basically short circuit because they've never heard that before. Like our brains are programmed to put somebody in a box and say we need it or we don't want it. And so the brain, firstly, if you go to a networking event, you want to be interested before trying to be interesting. So they want to ask because you've been so kind to them. But then secondly, they feel like they need to ask because you're a puzzle they can't solve. I say, well, what exactly is that? And then I respond with not an elevator pitch or a functional explanation because that doesn't work. What I'll do is I'll say, well, one of the things I love to see more than anything in the world is an amazing introverted service provider with enough talent, skill, and belief in themselves to start a business of their own. But what I find more often than not is they get stuck in this endless hamster wheel, struggling to find interested people, trying to set themselves apart, trying to make a sale, feeling like people only care about price. Do you know anyone like that? Now, if you go to a networking event, you should never go to a networking event unless you know who's going to be in the room. And I know that feels like a long ask, but truthfully, there are event apps, there are Facebook pages that have the people that went last year. If you connect with them and say you're going, you've got a 50-50 chance they are, and if they're not, you just connected with someone that will meet you on a Zoom call anyway, so there's no downside. So I always go profile shopping. I don't talk to anybody at a networking event that doesn't feel like a planned meeting. So I know that they're my right person. So then I will say, well, I'm on a mission to help people like yourself realize that you really can have a rapid growth business doing what you love, just not by getting better at your functional skill. Instead, just 3 things outside the scope of your functional skill. Actually, let me give you an example, and then I might tell a story. Now, notice the difference. I actually didn't tell you what I do. I didn't say I was in sales, I didn't say I was in marketing, because no one cares. Right? What they want is to know that you care about them. So notice there was no I. What's an elevator pitch? I do this for this group of people. I hate it. So if you learn to lean into passion and mission, to come back to that episode, if you can't express the why, the passion and the mission behind the goals, then you're going to feel transactional totally. So what I find is by doing that exercise and getting out the why, the passion and mission, you then start to translate that into the marketing. And so if you have found that you haven't done that, you're giving the marketer not everything that they need. And a lot of marketers don't know how to ask those questions because their job is to help you find your ideal prospect. And if you don't express to them, just like if you don't express to an employee why what you do matters and why it significantly makes an impact, you're hamstringing your team members because they don't care about your business like they should, and you're hamstringing your marketing team because they don't know how to articulate your value the way they should either.
Thank you. One last chance for questions. I have a couple to end to. Yes?
Sitting over here trying to think of how to ask this. One of my roles is interviewer, and for somebody like you, it'd be super interesting to interview a person like yourself, but it's also super difficult because you're so set in the stories. I'm curious from your point of view, people, all the different interviews and things that you've done, what kind of either tactics or approaches do the interviewers have that you find that you enjoy, that are able to get you to go deeper than the stories that you have planned? Like, how are people able to break your mold?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, there's 2 answers to that. So when I started being interviewed, you couldn't break my mold, right? So I would go with standard questions, but I also work with lower level podcasts, like everyone should start. Like, everyone wants to be on, like, the Entrepreneur on Fire or Jamie Masters Eventual Millionaire and things like that. And I understand why. Like, every time I go on one of those, I make 6 figures plus, right? But if you go on there the first time, you're not going to do a great job. So when I went on the lower level podcast first, I would have my standard questions and I have my standard answers and I'd practice them because as an introvert I need to prepare. But what I would do is I'd get good at a few set of questions, then I'd change the questions, then I'd change the questions. Now I'm at that point where people can ask me anything and I have a really great answer. I will say most interviewers are lazy interviewers, right? They do no research, they say they want a guest and they're actually just doing it because they feel like another episode on their podcast is what it's about. and I actually think the podcast will do exceptionally well. Oh, by the way, I asked Brian Smith for that new podcast we're going to launch.
Yeah.
He's ecstatic to be a guest.
Okay.
Yes, so what I find is they don't do their research. Like when I bring someone on my podcast who's written 3 books, I've read all 3 books before we get on a podcast. And by the way, I haven't read them, I'm 50 now. I've listened to all 3 books, and I'm a 3 times speed listener. Right? Australians talk quickly, we can listen quickly too. The reason for that is I'm looking for different questions that no one else has asked. Now, I also think that most people's podcasts, just like most people's businesses, are vanilla. And so, for instance, I have an advantage because when I interview people on the Introvert's Edge podcast, I'm looking through a very different lens that no one else is looking through. And I think every business has the opportunity to do that in a podcast. And I think podcasts are one of the best mediums on the planet to market your business and to drive people to your business. So I think that most people, they read the set bio. I'm always creating bios myself. And when I'm interviewing someone, and I'm lucky enough that I get to interview some really amazing guests that have created some amazing businesses, but I'm interviewing on things that nobody else has ever asked. And I think that is the key. Like for me, I even promote episodes when 1 out of 50 people ask me like 2 or 3 different questions that no one asked me. That's the one that I'll share on my social profile. And if you want to be a podcast host and have somebody share it, if you've asked them the same 6 questions that everyone else has asked, they don't want to share it. The same audience has seen and heard it all before.
And thank you for asking that question. I'm going to have to pick up a couple things because I actually have him as a guest on my podcast this afternoon on Flying with Founders. We're going flying, taking him from Lansing over to Grand Rapids Airport, and I'm going to need a way to break his mold and get him to share some authentic stuff, so thank you.
Well, and if I can add one last point to that, synthesizing information is really important. Original thought, like a lot of people, they don't listen. Active listening is something introverts have, extroverts definitely can be trained to do, but a lot of people they won't operate on the fly. Like if I hear what they say, a lot of times another question will occur to me, and I'll ask that rather than the next one on the list. And I feel like a lot of people get too rigid in their interview processes.
Right. Yeah, that's good. There was a couple more. Ann?
Yeah, I heard you mention Donald Miller, and I'm a story brand guide, so I appreciate the synergy there. You mentioned earlier that telling a story in a personal setting versus telling a brand story is kind of different. I'm curious if you could dive into that a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. So when you're telling the story of why your brand is significant, why it cares, why you care, what you're really trying to do is you're writing a lot of website copy about the reason for the business or the impact you want to have on people, and you're really sharing in a broader way your organization, its values, and meaningful impact that you want to have to the person that you're speaking to. When you're talking about story in sales, you're talking about a single person and its relevance to a single person that you're speaking to. So if you're sitting down, for instance, let's say I'm sitting with you and you're like, well, I understand what you're saying, but I just don't think it's going to work for me. Or maybe you're I'm trying to sell you commercial real estate, and you believe that you've got a lease for another 2 years. There's no reason for you to look at your lease right now. I would say something like, I perfectly understand, the last thing I want to do is waste any of your time, however, and then I'll segue into a story. And by the way, this is called an objection handling cushion for the extroverts that are listening. It stops you diving down and yelling at somebody for why they should listen. For an introvert, it stops your brain going into spasm, trying to figure out what to say. The words are very important. I've listened, and then I have an original thought. Don't use the word but. The word but is a subtraction term. It says, I didn't mean any of this. If you don't believe me, go home, tell your wife, you look beautiful in that dress, but, and see what happens. The word however is an additional term, and what it does is it causes you to say, I've listened to what you've said, what you're saying is important, however you consider this additional piece of information. But a story that you tell individually, you get a lot more time because you're sitting one-on-one with somebody. So you can really build a unique picture, but you also have the ability to not just tell them a story that you've well rehearsed, but you also get the opportunity to mold it to that person's unique challenge that you just heard, and then you can evolve the moral on the fly. So a lot of the stories that you see in StoryBrand, they're very evolved, and the StoryBrand process is great. Like, I'm definitely an endorser of that. The problem is that you're doing one-to-many. And so therefore you have to generalize in some way or be very specific, but you don't have the ability to do what I do on the fly in a networking room or in a sales conversation. And so it's not that what you do is a bad thing, it's what generates leads. But when you're one-on-one with someone, you have the opportunity to do something very different that you just aren't afforded the opportunity to do as easily.
Okay. I think what the thought process that you triggered within me was that what we do with Story Brand is really form the basis for it so that you can have a springboard for that more personalized.
Oh, you're 100% right. So, I mean, firstly, and I know Nick we have to get to because I know you want me to talk about unified message for a second, but what I find is marketing and sales, while sales is a part of marketing, usually marketing people hate salespeople and salespeople hate marketing in the corporate world. And in small business, you kind of have to be both things. But what I've found is that most people, and I've worked with a bunch of people in the Story Brand framework that have been licensed Story Brand people, and they're amazing at getting leads to come in. But a lot of times, telling stories in sales is something that's kind of foreign, right? And as a matter of fact, even since COVID, buying behavior has massively shifted to the fact that, I mean, most people have probably had a sale like this. How many people have had a sales call where you get on a call and you are interested in buying something and they start the call with, I'm so glad that we're on this call together today. Tell me a little bit about your business. I mean, my response is always, oh, I'd love to. After checking out my website, what questions do you have? And you watch them fall apart because they haven't done their research. But then you get a lot of introverts that have done their research, but they don't say it, right? They're like, let me tell you about my deck or tell me about your business because they feel like they're being nice. So when you think about my storytelling process, it's exactly how it fits into the sales process. And because sales now, people are coming in more educated, and they actually don't want to do small talk, which is awesome for introverts like us. For me, I'm not sure if you're introverted or not, but the thing that I will say is these days, the people that do small talk, what actually happens is a person then says, oh, so John, the reason why I booked this call today, and from that point onwards, they control the sale, right? And you've got to try and bring it back. So I always suggest you start a sale by saying, I'm so glad we can get on a call, not thank you for your time together today, because that creates an imbalance between you and the person you're speaking to. But then when they say, yes, me too, you say, now, while I've had a chance to look at our brief correspondence or the notes that you put on the reservation, while I've checked out your website and your LinkedIn profile, because a lot of that is static, what I would like to do quickly is take a step back, hear a little bit more about you, what you're struggling with, and how I can be the most help to you in the time we have together today. And what you just said is I've done my homework and my research, and you'll feel the relief and the change of chemistry with the person you're speaking to. And the reason for that is most people have this anxiety and annoyance that they're going to have to baby you into explaining what their business does. Then you've said, given them a reason and told them how can I be the most help to you in the time we have together today. And what I've found is by using and expressing the word you really precisely, again, you create relief because you're telling yourself from I'm a salesperson to I'm a consultant, I'm trying to give you advice. And sales has really become that simple now. If you just say that line and then listen to what they say, once you've listened, your only job is this. Help them realize that what they said is a symptom of a greater problem. Or give them a paradigm shift statement. Either or. So I might ask them a question that helps them realize it's a symptom, or I might make a statement. But what the statistics are is if they tell you what they need and you give it to them, they may buy eventually, they'll definitely fight you on price, and there's no customer loyalty. If you give them a paradigm shift, like for instance, I might sit with somebody and they'll say, oh, well, I'm really struggling with sales, I'm always fighting on price. I'm like, well, I don't want to project anything, but usually the problem is that you're not explaining what you do in the right way, you're explaining what you do by your functional skill. But don't let me project anything, like if you were to introduce yourself in a networking event, what would you say? And you watch them fall apart, right? That's a paradigm shift, it's actually a symptom of a greater problem. So then, once they've identified that, I will then use a story, like the story of Wendy that if you were in Grand Rapids with me yesterday, you would have heard, that explains how to restructure your messaging, and then I'll finish the story with, so for Wendy, while she should have started with sales, where she wanted to start with sales, she would have already lost. What you need to do first is make sure you've got a message that separates yourself from everybody else, and you know your niche to make you a commodity in a marketplace of one. And then I'll just use the words, does that make sense? And when they say yes, I then know they've just agreed to buy. So I'll say, great, at this stage I can bring you some great free content, or I can talk to you about what working with me looks like. So what you'll learn about kind of the framework that I have, what Story Brand is, here's how we get leads using story. Here's how we generate the brand experience using story. What I talk about is here's how you use a story strategically in a sale and make it relevant to the end user by creating a paradigm shift based on the symptom that they've identified. And then in networking, how you generalize, it's actually a lot more closely related to what you do in story brand, because you don't know enough about them unless you've done your research beforehand. So in networking, you'll find there's a lot more overlap, but in sales, it has to be far more personalized, and the emotional impact and the moral can be customized on the fly, which, as I said, you can generate 1,000 leads, which is great. There also needs to be the ability to close them. And so they both have their place, and they both work in different places.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. We're going to transition, but I'm up here, so I get the last two questions, unless anybody's dying for one more question, because I've been waiting. Okay, yes.
So, when you're talking about your story, and you're talking about using emotions, how do you know exactly how much emotion to use without going too deep, too quickly?
So, are you an introvert yourself?
I'm honestly not sure. Anytime I take a mark.
I was going to ask you, is there in between introvert and extrovert, is it omnivert? Is there something there?
The ambivert, yeah. So firstly, I will say, a lot of people will say things like, oh, I'm a recovering introvert, or I was an introvert, but don't worry, I'm not anymore. There's nothing wrong with being an introvert, right? The truth is, we all have our barriers. Like some might say extroverts aren't the best listeners, they're not the most empathetic. The difference is they know how to learn those skills, or they know they can learn those skills. Introverts don't think they can. The answer is where you draw your energy, that's it. So yes, there are so few people that are truly ambiverts. Usually, there are introverts that have learned systems for selling, networking, and now they enjoy it, so they think they're ambiverts. And you've got extroverts that have actively learned things like empathy and active listening, and they think they're now ambiverts too. Fact is, they are what they are, right? If you get a person that is an extrovert that thinks they're an ambivert, you lock them in a room and tell them to write a book for 3 weeks, they're going to climb the walls because they need human contact.
That was me.
That's you.
I had that problem with you.
Yeah, exactly. And so when you get an introvert like me, right, you know, I love doing stuff like this, but if you get me to do this day after day after day, eventually I'm going to short circuit.
How can someone in here tell if they don't know truly, am I an introvert, an omnivert, or an extrovert? How can they tell?
Interestingly enough, introverts tend to be very reflective people, but I feel like if you force yourself, everyone can be reflective. Like, finish a networking event. I mean, by the way, if you're the person that suggests that everyone goes to the pub after a networking event, you're probably an extrovert, right? And I feel like as an introvert, I had to learn to give myself permission, because I can meet up with you if you want to have a real conversation on Zoom next week and go home to recharge. But if you speak from stage, that's probably a bad test, because a lot of people are uncomfortable speaking from stage. But if you go to a networking event and at the end of it you're charged up, you're probably an extrovert. If you aren't, it's probably because, now don't get me wrong, you can overcomplicate it. I just choose not to, because like having some version that you can live by is really helpful. So if I leave a networking event, and I might be hyped up because of the conversations I have, but underneath, like when I go skydiving, I'm hyped up because my adrenaline is through the roof, but I know I'm about to hit a wall. And I feel like that's what an introvert has, is if they feel that they're emotionally strained, a little bit emotionally tired, you're an introvert. And that's okay. It's actually really important, and not something that I'm ashamed of. Like most of my team knows, don't call me for an hour after I walk off this stage, because I'm like a tantruming 5-year-old, and I don't want to be, you know, I need to, so everyone knows that during that period of time they need to protect me rather than me do the protecting. And that's fine, they're willing to accept that, because I'm open and honest about my vulnerabilities and what I'm good at and what I'm not.
Good. So last couple questions. First one's for fun, the second one's going to transition us into our next. We've gone a lot into the business side of storytelling. Let's go personal for a minute. How do you, with your spouse, how do you use storytelling? And I'll start in a selfish way. How do you use storytelling to get what you want? How can we use storytelling to get what we want in our lives?
Be very careful, guys, and girls, I will say. So being great at sales, you then realize that everything is a system and process. And for men that don't like talking about emotion and don't like being in that emotional place, it's actually really easy to protect yourself from being real. And so I would actually say the thing that I learned with storytelling is that I had to be less masterful at the home.
More authentic.
More authentic, be more real, and speak about things more genuinely. So I think when I'm in sales, and I don't want to make this sound like it's a bad thing, but when I'm selling, I'm very contrived about the exact words. Words are important. And again, as long as my motive is to get the person that I'm speaking to a better place. Like when you get up on stage, right? I mean, if my motive isn't in a positive place, you can be very manipulative in a negative way and you've got everybody's attention. when you're contrived in the house, you're not real. And I actually feel that that can cause you to feel very disconnected. And I've seen, like, there was a point when I was learning these strategies where I actually felt like I was third party watching like family conversations, like people would be talking, and I knew how to take a conversation to any place that I wanted to be. And what I had to do was give myself permission to not do that. And so I would say that everything I've learned in business and sales, and we were at EO yesterday and we were talking about the fact that personal life is actually a really important topic in business, because if your home life is destroyed, your business tends to be catastrophic. What I've actually learned is that I need to switch off how careful I am with words. So you'll notice that I'm a little slower and I'm a little precise, because I'm trying to make sure that every word has an impact, but I know what impact is in everybody's positive, what's in your best interests. But when you're having a relationship with your partner, sometimes it's better just to not be at your best.
Does she have a way of telling you, stop, I need you?
Yeah, she says, stop selling to me.
Stop selling to me.
Yeah, so, and my family gave her that cheat sheet when she married me. So they said, like, Matt can get to a point because it's comfortable for me to be in a regimented place, right? And when we talk about males not being very emotionally, sometimes we struggle to talk about emotions.
Right.
I use strategy and system to protect myself from emotions. I'm very good at identifying emotions in others, but reflecting on what emotions somebody else must feel and actually thinking about the emotions that I feel, it's actually really easy to guard that with system or process.
That makes sense.
And what's funny is if you do that, you end up a year later resenting your spouse because you didn't have a real relationship and somehow in your head it's their fault because it's never our fault, right? So what I've learned, and I learned this when we were dating, not when we were married, I had to realize that everything that I did in a sales process, even if I thought that getting my wife to a certain place was in her best interest, I just needed to let all that go and have a real dialogue.
Yeah, that's got to be hard sometimes to turn that off too when you're doing it all day.
I have to have mental breaks, so I tend to go to the gym after a work day, or I tend to go for a run after a work day, or if I've just been doing a virtual event or something, I'll switch on some ridiculously boring Netflix show that I've seen 1,000 times, because I do need to mentally switch. And sometimes she'll come and visit me like upstairs because I work from home, and she'll know that I'm in work mode. If she'll ask me a question, I'll come back when you're not selling to me.
Right. That's good. Well, good. I wanted to end him on the personal side, get off the business, and maybe break his mold a little bit. You notice he did get a little slower. He was being very up there. I like that. I'm going to try to get you that way on our flying.
You got me a long rehearsed question, mate. So you will find that, and I will say this to everybody, because when you're an entrepreneur, it becomes your entire identity sometimes. And I find that when that is the case, firstly, for the people in this room, like most people here want to get their business acquired, right? So I feel that when your business becomes your entire identity, then it's pretty hard to sell. So actually, a lot of people that say they want to sell their business, they don't separate themselves from the sales process because they don't want to. They don't separate. Eventually, I've worked with people that are selling their baby, and they've got more contracts sitting on their desk than they've ever seen before, and it's their baby that they're about to sign off, and they're really not comfortable. So, one of the things that I feel like we should just quickly highlight is, I work with this client that was a copywriter, right? And she was struggling to make $2,500 for a subscription, because nobody hires subscription copywriters anymore, and they just want piecemeal. And so she was she had one piecemeal, one subscription client, everything else was piecemeal. She was basically making no money. And what we realized was her passion was in the health tech space. And she found in the health tech space, and when you know a niche, you can actually spend some time thinking and learning about them. And it was easier for her. She had a heart condition, literally she wouldn't be alive today without health tech. But I was like, what happens in the health tech space that causes you to feel like you can contribute? And she says, well, usually they get a marketer that comes and sells them this whole concept of they should be doing more copywriting or whatever. But then they ask, what should we write about? And they end up writing to their golf buddies or their VC backers, not to their end user or buyer. She said, so what I would do is I would help them realize what their avatar was, help them audit their current content to realize that they're not actually speaking to their avatar, and then create a content tree of all the content they should write, and then we'll create a distribution plan for them. And so what I suggested is we actually turn that into a package that she offers with no intention of selling copywriting to them. as far as that sales process. Don't even bring it up, right? Go in as this unbiased person. I suggested we called her the mission maker, and that got her into doors, and she sold this, what I call the Trojan horse package, which was this short-term intensive to do that. Of course, at the end, she would then tell them what the scope of work to do it, suggest what it costs to go out and hire someone to do that, what if they did offshore, if they in-housed it. And our expectation was they would ask, well, can't you just do it? And the response was, well, yeah, absolutely, we could do that for you. We have a small in-house copywriting group. We don't usually offer that, but we really enjoy what you're doing. We feel like you're really passionate. We'd love to work with you. The price for that's $10,000 a month. Well, the first time she sold this Trojan horse package was like $3,500, and the person said yes. So now she's got $120,000 a year client. And the second time she did it, the guy didn't ask. So she then got to the end of the conversation. She said, well, we don't normally do this, but we're just so inspired by what you do. And she basically did the same script. The guy's like, yeah, that sounds great. Within 6 months, she had a $45,000 recurring business. And by the end of the year, she got applied. But she became the mission maven and became this identity of who she was. Then she had a team, and even that was hard. Like, she was the mission maven, and now there was a group of mission mavens, and it's like, that's my identity, right? And then when she was getting acquired, it became a department. And that was like selling her soul. And for her, that was really difficult. So one of the things that I would always suggest to people, when you learn system and process, when you create a business that's really aligned with who you are, you still need to keep in your head that this is a business. And the business must be sold, especially if you create something significant. Like, do I plan on selling my business? Like, absolutely. By the way, the first day that it should occur to you, you should sell your business, the day you open the business, right? Get an EIN, think about selling the business. And the reason for that is, I think the work that I'm doing is important. I think the work that every one of you is doing is important. If you don't sell it, it dies. And firstly, it's a wasted legacy, but then secondly, it dies, and all the people that it could have helped and all the people that could have earned a living doing the thing to help other people is totally lost. And that's why I love people that are actually having this open dialogue now. It's terrible that people couldn't discuss it before. Anybody that says, I'm not interested in selling my business because I want to see it, because what they're actually saying is, I want my business to shrink and die at some point. And that's just not a reality that anyone should accept.
That's a perfect closing for us, because that's what we're going to move into next, is talking about how you address the value of your business and transfer that to someone. So thank you very much.
Cool.
We're going to let you go do your introvert thing for a little bit, because I got you on a podcast in a couple hours.
Thank you, and I think you guys are going to talk about some curveball questions to ask me.
Yes, we are. We're going to figure it out. Thank you for being here.
Appreciate it.
Mike and Brian will bring you up. If anybody needs a quick break, restrooms are right back there, but we're going to keep moving because we've got lunch coming. And Brian, would you mind grabbing one more chair?